Today, we're diving into the fascinating world of political systems, specifically the differences between presidential and parliamentary systems. Let's jump right in.
Absolutely. I've been really looking forward to this topic. So, where should we start?
Well, I think it's best to begin by understanding that countries around the world use different systems of government to structure power and decision-making.
Right.
The two most common democratic systems are the presidential and parliamentary systems.
So what's the main difference between them?
The key difference lies in how the executive branch is organized and how leaders are elected. In a presidential system, the executive, the president, is elected separately from the legislature. The president serves as both the head of state and the head of government.
And in a parliamentary system?
In a parliamentary system, the executive, the prime minister, is chosen by the legislature, not directly by the people. Also, the roles of head of state and head of government are usually separate. The head of state might be a monarch or a ceremonial president.
So, in terms of separation of powers, how do they differ?
Good question. In a presidential system, there's a strong separation between the legislative and executive branches. They operate independently. But in a parliamentary system, the executive and legislative branches are intertwined. The executive comes from the legislature.
That must affect how laws are made and implemented, right?
Exactly. In parliamentary systems, because the executive and legislature are connected, it's generally easier and faster to pass legislation.
Right.
There's more cooperation and less likelihood of gridlock.
But doesn't that also mean there's a risk of too much power being concentrated?
Yeah, that's one of the criticisms. With the branches working so closely, there's potential for the executive to dominate. In contrast, the separation in presidential systems provides checks and balances, but can lead to legislative stalemates if the branches don't agree.
Makes sense. Can you give examples of countries that use each system?
Sure. Countries like the United States, Brazil, and Mexico use presidential systems.
Okay.
On the flip side, the United Kingdom, Canada, Germany, and India operate under parliamentary systems.
Interesting mix. Now, let's talk about term lengths and stability. How do they compare?
Well, in presidential systems, leaders serve fixed terms. For example, 4 years in the US.
Right.
This provides stability since the leadership doesn't change unexpectedly.
And in parliamentary systems?
In parliamentary systems, terms are more flexible. The prime minister can be removed at any time if they lose the support of the parliament through a vote of no confidence. So while this allows for removing ineffective leaders quickly, it can also lead to less stability.
So it's a trade-off between stability and flexibility.
Exactly. And this impacts how policies are implemented as well. Presidential systems might have slower policy changes due to checks and balances, while parliamentary systems can enact changes more swiftly.
But that speed might come at the cost of thorough debate and scrutiny, right?
Precisely. There's a balance to be struck. Fast policy changes in parliamentary systems can be efficient, but they might also bypass extensive deliberation.
So what about leader accountability? How does that differ?
In presidential systems, the president can't be easily removed from office. Impeachment is a long and difficult process.
Whereas in parliamentary systems, the prime minister can be ousted relatively quickly.
Exactly. A simple vote of no confidence can remove the prime minister. This keeps leaders more accountable to the legislature, but can also lead to frequent leadership changes.
It seems like both systems have their pros and cons in that regard.
Definitely. Another aspect is public control. In a presidential system, citizens directly elect their president. In a parliamentary system, the public elects the legislature, which then selects the prime minister.
So the public has a more direct say in choosing the leader in a presidential system.
Yes, but parliamentary systems often feature better representation of political parties, especially smaller ones, through coalition governments.
Right.
This allows for a broader range of voices in government.
Speaking of coalitions, doesn't that sometimes lead to unstable governments?
It can. When no single party has a majority, coalition governments are formed, which can be fragile if the parties don't agree. This can result in inefficiency or even government collapse.
So earlier you mentioned risks of authoritarianism in one of the systems. Can you elaborate?
Sure. In presidential systems, there's a risk that a strong president might consolidate power and undermine democratic institutions. Since the president combines the roles of head of state and government and isn't easily removable, they might overstep their bounds.
Whereas in parliamentary systems, the leader is more accountable to the legislature.
Exactly. The Prime Minister must maintain the confidence of the Parliament.
Right.
This can act as a check against authoritarian tendencies.
But then again, the Prime Minister can push through policies quickly, without much opposition, if they have a strong majority.
That's true. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. Both systems have mechanisms that can either prevent or enable authoritarianism, depending on how they're used.
It's like, no system is perfect, and each has its vulnerabilities.
Exactly. That's why some countries adopt hybrid systems to try to balance the benefits and drawbacks.
Oh, hybrid systems? Can you give an example?
Sure. France has a semi-presidential system where the president handles foreign affairs and the prime minister oversees domestic policy. So
Interesting.
power is shared between the two roles.
And how does that work out for them?
It aims to combine the stability of a presidential system with the flexibility of a parliamentary system.
Right.
But it also requires careful balance to prevent conflicts between the president and prime minister.
What about other countries with hybrid systems?
Russia is another example, though the power dynamics are different. The president holds significant authority, and the system leans more towards a strong presidential model.
So the debate over which system is better isn't straightforward at all.
Not at all. It depends
Yeah.
on various factors like political culture, history, and societal needs.
Do you think countries ever consider switching systems?
Yes, actually. Some countries contemplate changing their systems during times of political crisis or when current structures aren't working efficiently.
Right.
It's a significant decision that can have long-lasting impacts.
It underscores the importance of understanding these systems.
Definitely. An informed populace can engage in meaningful discussions about governance and democracy. Knowledge empowers citizens to advocate for systems that best suit their nation's needs.
So, to wrap things up, both presidential and parliamentary systems have their strengths and weaknesses.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Yeah.
It's about finding the right balance for each country's unique situation.
Well, this has been really enlightening. Thanks for breaking it all down.
My pleasure. Always happy to discuss political structures.
Before we go, do you think there's a system that's better for promoting democracy?
That's a tough question. Some argue that parliamentary systems promote greater responsiveness and accountability, while others believe presidential systems provide stronger checks and balances. It really depends on how they're implemented.
Fair point. Well, I guess the debate continues.
Indeed it does. Thanks for the
Yeah.
great conversation today.
Anytime. Looking forward to our next deep dive.
Me too. Until next time, take care.